Hello everybody, my name is Sara Svensson and I'm from Sweden and I'm part of the UNEP Major Groups Facilitating Committee and representing children and youth in the United Nations Environment Programme Civil Society Advisory Group on International Environmental Governance. I'm here today to talk to you about governance. So, what is governance? There are very many different definitions of governance, but the word itself, it comes from the Greek word of navigation. So it really means steering a ship. Think about a ship that needs to steer in a specific direction. It can go either this way or it can go that way. And if it goes this way, maybe it will be destroyed because there is a big cliff. But if it goes that way, it will steer the world to sustainability. So what we really need to do right now, we need to steer the world in the right direction, steer on course towards a sustainable future. And if we don't do that, the ship might even sink and be destroyed. And the United Nations was set up in 1945 to deal with international governance. So it was a platform for all the nations of the world to come together and work with each other on governance issues. So to design and execute policy that would create a world full of peace and security, human rights, and economic and social development. But what about the environment? Environment was not on the agenda of the United Nations until much later. It was in the 1960s when people started to discover that environmental issues could be global. Because before that, environment had been like just something very local or national, but you need to pick up the trash on the streets. But in the 1960s, it became more international because then the forests in Sweden started to die and nobody knew why. But later on they discovered that it was because of pollution that happened in a totally different country that traveled in the air and destroyed the forest somewhere else. So environmental problems had become global and invisible and very scary. So it was decided that all the nations of the United Nations would come together for a big conference that happened in 1972 in Stockholm in Sweden. And there the governments decided to start a United Nations Environment Programme. And this is the UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme, which got its headquarters in Nairobi in Kenya. And 20 years later, in 1992, the governments met again in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And that was a summit about sustainable development. Sustainable development is about the environment, but not only the environment. Environment is one part, but there is also a social dimension and an economic dimension. And they all need to go together in a synthesis. The Rio conference also started another UN institution. They created the Commission on Sustainable Development and placed it somewhere else in the UN system. So we have the United Nations Environment Programme and we have the Commission on Sustainable Development, and they both work on environmental issues. And in addition to that, we have more than 500 different multilateral environmental agreements that are set up to deal with specific environmental issues, like for example the Convention on Climate Change and the Convention on Biological Diversity. And there are other conventions that work with chemical issues and many other environmental issues. And the system has become very big and very complex, very many different organizations and UN bodies and entities working to solve the environmental issues and the environmental problems. And it looks like a big success. Like there are so many different great organizations working on environmental issues on the international level, and that's really good. But at the same time as all of this has been created, the environmental situation and the environmental trends in the world have gone in the opposite direction. It had become worse. So the polar bears are not very happy anymore. They are not happy. So the governments decided that something needs to be done. And now it's decided that 2012 there will be another big summit in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil that will try to change this situation. One of the issues on the agenda in Rio in 2012 is the institutional framework for sustainable development, or as UNEP calls it, the international environmental governance. So the United Nations deal with international governance, UNEP deals with international environmental governance, and then added to that was the sustainable development governance. And another addition that came after the Rio conference in 1992 was that governance for sustainable development became multi-level and multi-actor. So sustainable development needs to happen on the local level and on the national level in addition to the international level. And also governance is not only international, it's not only the nations meeting each other, but it is global because there are many other actors that are important. So there are youth and women, civil society groups, and business and industry, and everybody needs to come together and work towards sustainable development. So this is something that all of those groups need to be active towards the Rio conference in 2012 and make as much progress as possible there. So what the governments are doing in preparation for the Rio conference and the institutional framework for sustainable development, they are looking at the structure. They are looking at this and this. This is what they have to play with. So they have met in different conferences and discussed like this. What if we add another one here so that UNEP grows much bigger? And does the Commission on Sustainable Development really need to be here? Maybe we can take it away or make it smaller. And maybe we can bring them together and do like this so that you work better together. Or would it be better if we take a totally new organization and have this one instead? So there are many different options. They are playing with all of this. But is this the only thing that matters? The structure? I don't think so. Because if the structure is perfect, it's not a guarantee for the environmental problems to be solved. It has a lot to do with the people inside those organizations. So it has to do with who is the leader. What do they want? Do they really care about the environment? Do they want to create a sustainable future for everyone? Or are they more interested in just their personal career? We need the right people in those organizations. And it also has to do with people outside the UN who stands there and look at what those people are doing. The children and the youth of the world. So we all need to make sure that the ship that is the United Nations steer in the right direction and does not sink. That is our task towards Rio 2012, and we can do it. Get involved.